Opponent ready?
Yep.
Okay, I will begin my time of 5 minutes now. Hello everyone, I am Aadya from the Dolphin Debate Club. Today I'll be debating on the affirmative side of the resolution the US should adopt the metric system. Before getting into my plan and contentions, I would like to first explain some definitions. Metric system, the decimal measuring system based on the meter, liter, and gram as units of length, volume, and weight or mass. Imperial system, a system of measurement that uses units like feet, inches, pounds, and ounces. According to NIST, the metric system is used by 192 out of 195 countries in the whole world. The three countries which do not use the metric system yet are Liberia, Myanmar, and the United States of America. Liberia and Myanmar are both in the process of switching to metric, and once that is done, out of the 195 countries identified by the United Nations, 194 would be using metric, and the US would be the only country left using the imperial unit system. How I plan to put this policy in action is with these two steps. Step 1. Encourage activities of standardization organizations to start using the metric unit of measurement. Step 2. Help the public become aware of this new unit of measure being used and teach them how to use it by changing curriculum in school to only teach metric units, making certain classes for adults who are not familiar with this measurement system, and etc. This process has to be a bill passed by the US Congress. It will take around 10 years, considering the fact that China, the world's second biggest economy, only took 6 years. This plan I estimate to cost around 42 billion US dollars, based on the fact that our similar neighbor Canada used about 1.5 billion Canadian dollars for their late 20th century conversion to metric, which I have adjusted upward according to the exchange rate, inflation, and the larger size of the US population. And as per where this funding will come from, it would be possible to bring it from the recent budget cuts done by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, since according to the BBC, it has enough money to cover the cost of my plan. The cost of conversion is a one-time spend, but spending this money can lead to a better future for the USA in the long run. My framework and burden. I believe that this debate should be judged by a cost-benefit analysis, meaning that if the positive outcomes of adopting my plan outweigh the negative outcomes, my plan should be adopted. Contention 1. Global standardization. If the US adopts the metric system, it would save billions of dollars each year spent on conversions within infrastructure, product labeling, and international trade. According to the US Metric Association, the US government and businesses combined spend $15 to $30 million per year on conversions. Contention 2. Simpler and more logical system plus improved education. The metric system is based on multiples of 10, making conversions between bigger units to smaller units easier. With the customary system, conversions are specific, making it harder to convert. For example, 1,000 meters equals 1 kilometer, hence the prefix kilo. But in comparison, 1,760 yards equals 1 mile. 1 yard and 1 meter are almost equal, but comparing the conversion, customary conversions are much harder to memorize. Another example in the metric system, 0 degrees Celsius is the freezing temperature and 100 degrees is the boiling temperature. Super simple to remember, but imperial, the freezing temperature is randomly 32 degrees, while the boiling temperature, I don't even have that at the top of my head. It also makes learning measurements of all kinds easier at public schools in the US, since children are taught both systems of measurement. If the US follows the same system of measurement as the rest of the world, then learning two systems and confusing children with those two systems is not necessary. Contention 3. Safety and precision. Finally, changing to the metric system can give more accurate measurements, reducing the risks of any sort of dosage issues to occur. Mixing up measurements in engineering or construction can cause mistakes, which can end up costing a lot. Mixing a milliliter and a teaspoon can cause serious issues in healthcare also. To avoid any of the potential errors as listed here, adopting the metric system can be very helpful to keeping us safe. Thank you.
All right, so I believe it is cross-examination. So 2 minutes on the clock. Everyone ready?
Yep.
Okay, 2 minutes starting now. Okay, so could you quickly go over your plan again?
Like a quick overview, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so step one, encourage activities of standardization organizations to use the metric system. Step two, help the public become aware of this new unit of measure and teach them to kids and adults. And this bill has to be passed by the US Congress, and it will take around 10 years. And I estimate this to cost around 42 billion US dollars based on the fact that our similar neighbor Canada used about 1.5 billion Canadian dollars for their late 20th century conversion to metric. And the money would come from the recent budget cuts done by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, since according to the BBC, it has enough money to cover the cost of my plan.
Okay. And then in your first part of your plan, you talk about how the US will encourage the change to the metric system. How exactly will that be done?
So basically, there would be like a board of like they would gather a board of members, and that board of members would ask people's opinions on the metric system, and by that they will encourage people to start doing that, start using the metric system.
Okay, but what happens if people don't want to use the metric system?
If people don't want to use the metric system, then it will basically be by a majority vote if they want to use it or not. And and usually it's not. It's going probably going to be metric.
Okay, thank you. That is all the questions I have. So then I believe it is 2 minutes of prep time, starting now. All right, so the 2 minutes that are done. So next is the first negative speech. So 7 minutes on the clock. Everyone ready?
Yep.
Okay, I would like to start my time now. Hello, my name is Zaylen, and I am arguing on the negative side of the resolution the US should adopt the metric system. So I'm going to start out by agreeing with my opponent's definitions and their framework, as I believe that I can win by proving that my opponent's plan should not be adopted if it does not pass the cost benefit analysis, meaning that its expected negative outcomes are more significant than its expected positive outcomes. If you're convinced of this by the end of this debate, please vote negative. So next I'm going to start by attacking my opponent's points and then defending my own. So starting with my opponent's points, their first contention Let me talk on their plan. So their first part of their plan is where they talk about encouraging activities to have people switch to the metric system. And the very first thing they said when I asked them about what they would do in CrossX is ask people about whether they want to switch to the metric system. And if enough people agree, then we would switch to the metric system. And first off, if that is step one, and step two is teaching people about the metric system, I don't see any part in that plan of where I don't see any part in that plan in where we would be replacing everything that uses the imperial system to the metric system. And when my opponent said that they would have like a government agency ask people what they wanted, I will respond to that in one of my own contentions. Contention two of my opponent, so they talk about how the metric system is easier to understand. However, that's like saying spelling and pronunciation of words in English isn't as logical as, say, Spanish or French, and that all English speakers should just stop speaking English and switch to a different, more straightforward language. With the amount of work, money, and resources it would take to switch to another measurement system, it outweighs any benefit you get from measuring something in centimeters and inches. Then, for my opponent's contention three, they talk about how there are conversion errors from switching to the metric system. However, if we assume for a second that the metric system and the imperial system have can both be used, then we could just fully switch to the imperial system rather than fully switching to the metric system. And that connection doesn't specifically support my opponent, as it can go either way. Because if there's a conversion error, that means that the US is using half imperial and half metric. But if we fully switch to imperial, that also gets rid of the problem. So now that I responded to my opponent's contentions, I would like to go ahead and list mine. So contention one, switching to the metric system. The US has so many things based around the imperial system, and by switching to it, all of these things will need to be changed. So point A, work. The amount of effort needed to switch to the metric system is immense. Imagine how many road signs you see on the way to school or work. Imagine how many you see when driving on a freeway. There are speed limit signs, mile markers, signs advertising distances to commercial establishments. Now multiply that by the vast number of roads throughout the United States. All of those signs will need to be changed. Houses and carpets are measured in square feet. Even fun events and theme park rides will need to change their height restrictions. Switching to the metric system will require all of these things and many more to be changed. This not only involves cost, but an immense amount of work. Subpoint B, education. If the US were to adopt the metric system, they would have to educate everybody in the US about how to use, measure, and gather information using this system. For older people who are used to the imperial system, it will be harder for them to change, or maybe even impossible. And even if they were educated in it, knowing how far along or heavy things are using the metric system takes experience and can't happen immediately. And even if they were educated in it, in fact, Canada had decided to switch to the metric system, and there was worry that people would miscalculate measurements. And due to conversion errors, because they decided to switch, and in the middle of switching, they were in half imperial and half metric, a Canadian plane ran out of fuel mid-flight. And that was 13 years into their conversion process. Condition two, people do not want the metric system. And in my opponent's condition one, they talked about in their plan, they talked about how people do want the metric system. However, I have proof that people don't. In fact, a recent study showed that about 88% of Americans would not support the change to the metric system. And if the people don't want to use the metric system, then we shouldn't do it. So, in summary, I've given reasons why the US should adopt the metric system, as I talked about how much work would be involved, that you'd have to educate everyone, and that the most importantly of all, people don't want the metric system. And my opponent's plan is based around people actually wanting the metric system. I believe that I've responded to my opponent's points and that I have given my own, that I believe that the US should not adopt the metric system. Thank you.
Okay, I believe that next is cross-X. I will begin my 2 minutes of cross-X time now. Okay, where did you get the number of people that don't want the metric system?
Okay, so there was a poll done by YouGov, and it was written up by Jamie Ballard.
Okay, um, so um, yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, so I believe next is 2 minutes of prep time, starting now. The 2 minutes of prep time is up.
Yes, I will begin my 4-minute rebuttal speech now. Okay, so first I am going to respond to my I'm going to respond to what my opponent said against my case, and then attack his case. Okay, so first, so in my plan, you're saying that if people don't want it, how could you? So you can't really tell if in the poll that you said you found, in that poll you can't really tell. Not everybody in the U.S. voted. I'm pretty sure, and I'm pretty sure that should be right. And then my first contention, people the US government spends 15 to 13 million dollars per year on conversions, so it will save a lot of money. And then contention 2, simpler and more logical system. The metric system is much more easier to remember than the customary system, as I gave examples of the differences in the difference in the conversion thing. And then in my contention 3, you said that and then you said that if you fully change to imperial, these things won't happen. Well, if you fully change to imperial, you're still trading with other countries, because you're still the number one economy in the whole world. So you're still trading with other countries, which means there still will be more errors. Um, for example, the Mars orbiter crash, it ended up causing the U.S. to get $125 million loss, which is $239 million today. Now I go to your contentions. Um, so, so in the infrastructure change, you say that the expense may be costly in your opinion, but the cost of changing is a one-time expense, and the result can help the future of the U.S. And then education. Children in schools are already taught both systems. So wouldn't that just make schooling easier? Because instead of learning two systems at once, they only learn one system. And then yes, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, so now it is 2 minutes of prep time, starting now. Okay, the 2 minutes are up. So I would like to do my next speech. 5 minutes on the clock. Everyone ready?
Yep.
Okay, 5 minutes counting down, starting now. Hello, just a reminder, my name is Zaylen and I am arguing on the negative side of the resolution the US should adopt the metric system. So in this speech, I am going to try to defend all of my contentions, attack my opponent's contentions, and then finally just summarize everything and show why I believe that I should win this debate. So let's get started. For my opponent's plan, when I talked about and when they I talked about how in cross six they said that the people would want it and that's why we should do it. And then I gave evidence that the people don't want it. And what my opponent said to that was not everyone in the US voted, so you don't so like that's not a good number. However, in many things, not everyone in the US votes. But I believe that this is a good estimate about how many people want it. Even if it goes down by like 8 or 10%, still more than half of the people in the US, more than three-quarters of the people in the US don't want the metric system, so we shouldn't do it. Then, for my opponent's contention one, they taught, which is about how the U.S. saves a lot of money, and I will read off my response in a minute. Because the only thing my opponent said was just repeating it will save a lot of money, and they didn't give any other reasons why we should agree with that. And so let me just respond to that, like I did last convention. So like I said before, money isn't the ultimate factor. And if something saves money, but it's worse in many other ways, you shouldn't do it. It's like if you were to buy moldy food, you would save money, but you could get sick, making it not worth it. The same applies here, and as I've shown in my contentions, there are many other disadvantages to switching to the metric system. So for my opponent's contention two, they talk about how the metric system is easier to remember, and they repeat that in the rebuttal and not much else. So I will repeat my response to that as well, which is that like even though English isn't as logical as like Spanish, the people who speak English shouldn't switch to Spanish because and same thing applies here that like there isn't enough benefit and all the work, money, and resources it would take to switch to the metric system just isn't worth it, just to measure something in centimeters rather than inches. Finally, my input in this third contention, they talk about how changing to the metric system can reduce conversion errors. And after I respond to that, they say that if you fully change to the imperial system, you'll still be the only person who uses the imperial system, so there will still be more errors. However, the example that they give is about NASA, which is a U.S. Government agency. And that U.S. government agency had a problem with one of their space explorations, which cost them money. However, because it was part of the US, if they fully converted to the imperial system, it still would have worked. And so I don't believe that is a good example for upholding that contention. So now I'm going to go ahead and respond to my contention. So my opponent's attacks on my contentions. So first off, my first in my first contention, I talk about how there's a lot of work to do. And the only thing my opponent says is like, I think it's like, I think what they said is like, it like the costs aren't that much considering you can save stuff. And I'm not sure why they said that because I'm talking about the work, not the cost. So I believe that I have responded to that. And then in my second point, how I talk about the education, my opponent said that children in schools are already taught both systems. However, however, if the US is based around the imperial system and if we fully switch to the imperial system, then they won't have to be taught both systems. They can learn those systems, but if they don't have to be taught both systems if we want to avoid conversion errors. And then finally, my opponent dropped my point about how the people want the metric system. So, and I do not believe that you should allow them to respond to it in a their later speech, as I will not be able to respond to it, and that would be unfair. So just to quickly go through, I talk about how switching to the metric system takes a lot of work, I talk about the education and how you have to teach a lot of people about it. And I also talk about how people don't want the metric system. I believe that I have responded to my opponent's points and I have given good points about why the US should adopt the metric system. So please vote negative. Thank you.
Okay, I believe we have 2 minutes of prep next. I'll start the 2 minutes of prep now. Okay, that is the end of the 2 minutes of prep. I will begin my 3 minute speech, my last speech, now. Okay, so first I would like to rebut my contentions and what he said against my contentions. So my second contention: languages and measurement systems are two very different things. So um, if we switch to Spanish, because English is harder, that's different than switching from imperial to metric, because metric is a base 10 system. It's super easy to memorize, unlike the case of imperial system. 1 mile equals 1,760 yards. That is very hard to memorize, unlike 1,000 meters is equal to 1 kilometer, which which is super easy to remember. My third contention: he used a Gimli Guider incident that should be evidence taken to my side, since it is an example of a conversion error. And then I would like to explain the points that he said against he did to protect his case. So, for education, you said that if we fully convert to imperial, then children again are taught only one system. But one way or another, children still have to learn the metric system some way, because unless that those children don't want to travel to other countries and like just stay in one place their whole life. So um, that's one thing. And yes, that's all I have. And if you feel like affirmative had more points than negative, please vote F. Thank you.
Great. So that concludes that debate. What we'll do now is we'll have our judges finish filling out their ballots and submit those via email. You can just send those in a reply to the email in which you received the judging instructions in, which is also where the ballot is available. Um, Once I've received all three ballots, I will say that out loud, and then we'll move on into a period where the judges are invited to share their opinions on the debate, offer verbal feedback to the debaters, and at that point also reveal their votes. So sit tight. I'm going to keep an eye on my email and be ready for the announcement of when those ballots are all good to go and we can start our talkback. Cool. Got 2 out of 3 ballots in, just waiting on our third. Then we will be good to discuss the round. Great. So all 3 ballots are in. Let's turn it over to the judges to get their thoughts. If everybody wants to turn on their cameras, once again, we'll start off in the order the ballots were received with Hannah Morris from the University of Arkansas.
Awesome. Okay, so great job to both debaters. I got to watch you guys twice today, so that was really cool. I'm going to start off with something that will work for both debaters, and then I'll go into more detail, just some different areas that I saw for improvement in both debaters separately. So the first thing is for both of you, you're both really starting to grow in your debate skill, which is fantastic. I've especially watched Zaylen before last year around this time, so the growth there is really, really good. But the next thing that you should be working on is your speaking skills. So both of you are doing really well with that as well. But just remember that one of the biggest ways that we hear and perceive argumentation and then make decisions based upon that argumentation is with your voice. So one of the things that I tell my students a lot is to try to remove those phrases that are a little wishy-washy. So things like I think or I it's kind of like this, things like that can really make it sound like you're questioning yourself. And that way the judge will also begin to kind of question you, right? Like, in this area, we can see that it can be a little bit confusing if you're saying kind of, maybe, I think. It sounds like you're not really sure. Now, moving into Aadya, I thought it was very good. I thought your setup was really good for your speech, and it was really, really thorough. There were a couple things here, and I'm not going to mention everything, but it is all on the ballot. I think the major thing that I want to focus on is cross-examination. So within cross-examination, it is one of the most important parts to the entire round, in my opinion. I think that rounds are won based on cross-examination. So since you have an idea of what the other side is looking for and what the other side is actually going to be debating, I think a really good way to help you with filling that cross-examination time is to, pre-prep some cross-examination questions. This way you have something tangible that you can kind of hold on to in this instance that would help you to move forward with more questions. Typically what ends up happening if you're asking questions, another question that spurs off of the original one is going to end up coming up, right? So essentially what I'm telling you is to try to gather more of those cross-ex questions, because it is going to really substantially help you. And then for Zaylen, I really liked your idea of swapping entirely to the imperial system instead of just doing half and half. I thought that was a really creative way to look at it. One thing that I did want out of that, though, since you kind of opened the door to that, I wanted to know what that would look like. I wanted to know what the implementation of that might be. And I wanted to know what the benefits of an entirely imperial system would be as opposed to an entirely metric system, or both, right? So I thought that that would have been a really good way to kind of step up that argumentation and really make sure that that argumentation was solid on all sides. That said, I thought that it was really creative, and I thought the way that you painted the scene for the judge about, looking at all of the signs that we pass by every day that we just don't really think about. I thought that was really good. So generally speaking, I thought that everybody did a fantastic job, but what I will say is I did vote in favor of the negative, which was represented by Zaylen.
Great. Moving on to our next judge, we'll move over to Max. Let's get your thoughts on this debate.
All right, well, first things first, and probably the most obvious here is I do need to echo what Hannah said. This was like a really, really, really good round. I was floored by how good both of you are. Y'all did amazing. Uh, the biggest thing that I saw that I think both of you could probably stand to keep working on. You're both doing a really good job at this already, but it's one of the things that I, at least from my experience, has been one of the easiest ways to up your game in debate is to be better at organization. Specifically when you're talking about responding to some specific point. If you can keep those really, really straight and make sure that you and your judge both know exactly what argument you're responding to. So, like being able to say, in response to my opponent's contention one, which was this, I say, and then having a little short phrase that can kind of sum up what your argument is so that your judge writes it down and remembers it is really, really helpful. And you guys are both starting to do that already, and it's really, really good. But one of the easiest ways I think you can make your debating even more convincing and easier to follow is to just keep working on that and keep doing more of that. A couple other specific little things that stuck out to me. The first one was Aadya. When you are responding to things your opponent says when you're not in cross-ex, at least in most of the different formats that I've experienced, one of the kind of ways you're generally expected to act is to just talk to your judge, act like you're talking about the arguments that your opponent made instead of talking to your opponent about the arguments they made. It's a little thing. It's really weird. It feels wrong sometimes. But the reason we do that usually is because it helps to make sure that we're talking about the ideas and not the people. And it's just like one extra little safeguard. So just remembering to do that will help just add a little bit more familiarity to people who've been doing this for a little while who are watching your rounds. And I think Hannah talked about the other things that I was going to talk about. So that's all I got. Y'all did amazing. I was really, really impressed. You're both really good at this.
Cool. And which side are you voting for?
Oh, I am sorry. I also did vote for the negation.
All right. Now we move on to judge number 3. We have Sebastian.
Hi, guys. I don't have nearly as much experience as Max and Hannah, but I just have a couple things that did stand out to me. Number one, Aadya, during your initial speaking time, you're very well spoken, just getting all those ideas out there very quickly, very well articulated. It was great. And then in terms of you, Zaylen, I loved your analogies. It really made it easier for me to follow along, particularly the one about, comparing the systems of measurement to English and Spanish, it just helped frame things. So that's what really stood out to me, and I gave my votes in the negative.
Great. So much appreciated again to our judges, and congratulations again to our competitors for all the fantastic growth that they've had over the course of this season. I think it may even be a first tournament for one of our competitors, so that's very exciting. To those of you who are in the audience, this is the end of the Ready, Set, Debate Slam Tournament final round. So I'm going to turn it over to Doreen, who's going to tell us what is coming up next.
Thank you, Price. That was so fun to watch. Congratulations to all of the debaters. I particularly had just texted Price. I love hearing the feedback from the judges. That's so constructive and helpful. Thank you all for helping all these young men and women to get better and better at this. That's so great. All right, thank you, everybody. You all can feel free to log out of Zoom. Our last event of the day is coming up. We have a little bit of a break now. The Center Stage Talent Show will be at 2 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Central.